The apartment building stood tall and silent against the night sky, its windows like dark, empty eyes. To outsiders, it seemed like just another old building in a forgotten part of the city. But those who lived there knew better. They knew about the strange occurrences, the unexplained sounds, and the sense that something was always watching. When Clara moved in, she was unaware of the building's dark reputation. Recently divorced and looking for a fresh start, she was drawn to the building's old-world charm and affordable rent. Her new apartment was small but cozy, with creaky wooden floors and high ceilings. It had an odd, musty smell, as though it had been unoccupied for a long time, but she dismissed it as the quirks of an old building. At first, everything seemed normal. Clara spent her days unpacking, arranging her furniture, and settling into her new life. The neighbors she met in passing were friendly enough, but there was a quietness to them, a certain wariness that she couldn't quite place. The building itself was strangely quiet. It started with small, subtle sounds, the distant creaking of floorboards, the faint rustling of fabric, and the occasional, almost imperceptible thud. Clara told herself it was nothing. The building was old, after all, and old buildings made noises. But as the nights passed, the sounds grew louder, more insistent. It was as if something was moving through the walls, just beyond her reach. One evening, as Clara was preparing dinner, she heard it clearly for the first time, a soft, rhythmic tapping like knuckles rapping against wood. She froze, her heart pounding. The sound seemed to be coming from the wall behind her. She waited, holding her breath, but the tapping continued, steady and unrelenting. Summoning her courage, Clara knocked back. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the tapping resumed, this time faster, more urgent. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the tapping would start again, now accompanied by a faint whispering that seemed to seep through the walls. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably pleading, almost desperate. She covered her ears with her pillow, but it did little to drown out the sound. Eventually, exhausted and terrified, she fell into a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of dark, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her apartment. The next day, Clara spoke to the building's superintendent, Mr. Collins, an elderly man who had worked there for as long as anyone could remember. When she mentioned the noises, his expression turned grave. He avoided her gaze and mumbled something about old pipes and settling foundations, but his demeanor told a different story. There was something he wasn't telling her, something he was afraid to say out loud. Determined to find answers, Clara began talking to her neighbors, asking if they had ever experienced anything strange. Most were reluctant to speak, brushing off her questions with nervous laughter or hasty excuses. But one neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Adler, finally opened up. "People here don't talk about it," she whispered, glancing around as if someone might be listening. "But there's something wrong with this place, always has been. I've lived here for 20 years, and I've seen things, heard things, that can't be explained." Mrs. Adler told Clara about the building's dark history, about the accidents and tragedies that had occurred over the years. Tenants who had mysteriously disappeared, unexplained deaths, and a long line of residents who had left in the middle of the night, but never to return. She spoke of a family who had lived in Clara's apartment years ago, a husband, wife, and their young daughter. The husband had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, and the wife had vanished without a trace. The daughter, little more than a toddler, was left behind, found wandering the halls, alone and crying. "They say her spirit never left," Mrs. Adler said, her voice trembling. "People have seen her, heard her. She's looking for her mother, for someone to help her, but no one ever does." That night, as Clara lay in bed, the tapping returned, louder than ever. She pulled the covers over her head, trying to block it out, but the sound only grew more insistent. And then she heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "Please, help me." Clara's heart raced. The voice was that of a child, and it was coming from inside her apartment. She bolted upright, her eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. The tapping grew frantic, as if whatever was making the sound was desperate to be heard. Trembling, Clara got out of bed and followed the noise to the small closet in the hallway. With a deep breath, she opened the door. The closet was empty, save for a few old coats left by the previous tenant. But the tapping was louder now, coming from the back wall. Summoning all her courage, Clara pressed her ear against the wall. The whispers were louder, clearer. "Help me. I'm lost." She couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing a flashlight, Clara returned to the closet and began knocking on the wall, searching for any hollow spots. After a few moments, she found one. The wall sounded different, as if something was hidden behind it. With trembling hands, she pried at the edges of the old, peeling wallpaper, revealing a hidden door. The door was small, almost child-sized, and locked with a rusted latch. Clara hesitated, fear gripping her, but the whispers grew more insistent. She had to know what was behind that door. Steeling herself, she broke the latch and pulled the door open. Inside was a small, cramped space filled with dust and cobwebs. The smell of decay was overwhelming, and Clara had to cover her mouth and nose. In the corner, half buried under debris, was a small, worn-out teddy bear and a pile of yellowed newspapers. The bear's fur was matted, and one of its eyes was missing. Clara picked it up, her heart aching for the lost child it had belonged to. As she held the bear, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into sobs, heartbreaking and full of sorrow. Clara knew then that the spirit of the child was trapped here, unable to move on. Determined to help, she began to clear out the hidden space, hoping to find something that would give her answers. As she sifted through the debris, she found an old photograph, yellowed and creased. It was of a young girl, no more than 5 years old, holding the same teddy bear. Behind her, a woman, presumably her mother, stood with a distant, vacant expression. That night, Clara sat in her living room, holding the photograph and the teddy bear, speaking softly to the child she knew was listening. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'll help you. I'll help you find your mother." For the first time in weeks, the apartment was silent. The tapping had stopped, the whispers gone. Clara felt a strange sense of peace, as if the building itself was finally at rest. But as the days passed, Clara began to notice subtle changes in the apartment. The temperature would drop inexplicably, and objects would move on their own. She started seeing shadows in her peripheral vision, fleeting glimpses of the little girl in the photograph. The child was still there, watching her, waiting. Then one night, the peace was shattered. Clara was awakened by a loud crash in the hallway. She rushed out of bed to find the closet door wide open, the teddy bear lying in the middle of the floor. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent than ever. "Please, help me." Clara knew what she had to do. She needed to find out what had happened to the child's mother, to uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. She spent days poring over old records, visiting libraries, and interviewing former tenants. What she discovered was a tragic story of loss and despair. The mother, distraught after her husband's death, had taken her own life, leaving the child alone in the apartment. The little girl had wandered the halls, searching for her mother, until she too succumbed to the cold and hunger. Armed with this knowledge, Clara returned to her apartment, determined to free the child's spirit. She held a small, private ceremony, offering words of comfort and closure to the lost souls that haunted the building. As she spoke, she felt a presence in the room, a soft touch on her shoulder, as if the child was finally saying goodbye. The next morning, the apartment was different. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. The tapping had stopped, the whispers silenced. Clara knew that the spirits had finally found peace. But as she packed her belongings to move out, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. The teddy bear, now sitting on the windowsill, seemed to watch her with its remaining eye, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded in the apartment. And though the whispers had ceased, Clara knew that the building still held its secrets, waiting for the next tenant to uncover them. As she closed the door behind her for the last time, Clara whispered a final farewell to the spirits she had helped set free. The building stood silent, its dark history hidden once more, waiting for the next chapter to begin.